I've been coming to this valley for the last 61 years. When I was taken up to London at the age of 9, and it was a very dreary desert of another kind for me, a desert thick with people. What I wanted to do was to get out. But from the age of about 12 onwards, I was allowed to wander about by myself, and for the next 2 or 3 years I did that in this landscape along the seaside. The country you belong to is part of your religion. It's what you've been given. It's part of your incarnation. To deny it means something very fundamental. Why are we back here today? First, I suppose, in one way, I've come to say goodbye in the sense that I don't expect to be here for any length of time again. Secondly, I've learnt, as I've gone through life, to write landscape poems.
I think the most characteristic thing you can say about Arthur King is that he wouldn't like this film, or any film made about him. For him, someone else is at the center of his world. He is not at the center of it. The most inappropriate thing that could happen would be to put Arthur at the center. That's just an uncomfortable thing for him. But it's good for us to, I think, get to know a person who doesn't want to be at the center of his world, who feels uncomfortable there.
A lot of what we learn is the person, not simply the subject. And that's certainly true with Arthur. The experience of learning together is the fundamental experience of education. It isn't a matter of learning a body of information. It's that aha experience. And that's a shared experience. And that's what we found with Arthur.
Do you know all those little luxuries that you have to give up when you're confronted with the truth? All of those silly little half-thought-out ideas, and you know what it is to get an essay written and to have Arthur say, that's not acceptable, and you have to go back and do it all over again. I think that all of us who know Arthur have this sense that he's always pushing us to stand taller, and that's not a bad thing.
Arthur is able to read himself into a period, the popular culture, the language, the philosophy, the literature, so deeply that he can tell with every word usage, with the structure of the sentences of the characters in a play or a novel. He can tell whether they are speaking straightforwardly or in some other way, not being honest. And if you read with him, and it's a privilege to do that, if you read with him, you get inside the world of the play or the book. The characters come to life, and he doesn't impose any generalizations. He doesn't say, this is what this passage is saying. Instead, he says, notice this detail, notice this one and this one. When he gets a few hundred of those gathered together in a single passage, why? It just comes to life.
One of my favorite stories that Arthur told is about when he was a boy and saw fairies dancing on the frozen pond behind his home. Well, he rushed in to tell his father, who was a very proper man, and his father made him, would not let him play until he disavowed having seen the fairies, which I can't remember whether Arthur ever did. I suspect he did. But when I asked him what he thought the fairies were, he very seriously said to me, he said, well, I have no reason to doubt they were fairies. You have to understand, Arthur King, a highly respected scholar in academic circles today, still believes that as a child he saw fairies skating on a frozen pond behind his home. And if that's not remarkable enough, he has gotten me to believe it too.
One Sunday morning when my father took me, probably because he'd been there himself and said, I must give my son this experience, and there was this tremendous expanse of bluebells in the middle of this oak wood. And of course the smell and the look of the whole thing struck me for life. I think it opened up to me a sense that there was this quality in nature which is of supreme importance. In landscape, you can find the most obvious evidence of a creative, providential power for good. That makes landscape not into a refuge or an escape, but a means of measurement. I feel in landscape what I feel in music, what I feel in the dance, which includes games, what I feel in mathematics, and that is this question of rhythm. You have got, along the horizon, a long succession of episodes which are exactly equivalent to musical episodes, because it rises and falls and rises and falls and rises and falls as it goes along from east to west. No sequence is the same as any other sequence, but the whole thing comes together in an ensemble, in a totality, in something harmonious that belongs together. If religion is about anything else, it is not anything else than a sense of integration, of making a whole of things, of making sense of the things as a whole. In writing about landscape, I've always had the sense that one is able to glimpse through the veil. The problem has always been with people who have such experiences to be able to enable others to share them, because ultimately one can't be a poet unto oneself any more than one can love oneself. At least you have to have the example of loving others to be able to love yourself at all. He envies the green man dancing alone by the brook of common day. He is jealous of a girl in a yellow gown, whom the primroses won away. He dreams them lost, each in their scene, found by the air and sun. The green man moves in a circle of green, and she gains what the primroses won. The sprites within them dancing there to ditties of no tone, spirited out of the sun and air, are more than ever their own. Alone they are lost, alone they are found, yet they never were closer together, as voiceless, breathless, without a sound, they dance in the rippling weather. He dances by the brook of day, and she in the primrose wood. The girl will not draw the man away, nor the man the girl if he could. He dreamed their dance on a frosty night. He would live that dream if he could. Lover by mistress, alone and light, as a brook by a primrose wood. My father appears to be wearing a buttonhole of lilies of the valley, which was my mother's favorite flower, and when I was born on February the 20th, 1910, he rushed out at once to get a bunch of lilies of the valley from the neighboring florists. My mother was not, like my father, a born Quaker. His family had been Quaker since 1653, but my mother, of course, was a Baptist and had to become a convinced friend. It took them over a year to be satisfied of her genuineness. The Quakers were very thorough about that kind of thing. Quakerism felt to me, as far as social relations was concerned, as some kind of haven. But that the quietism of it, the pietism of it, but it also felt to me like a trammel, like something which didn't allow me to be myself, that I had to discipline myself into mildness, and here was all this ferocity to deal with. My mother's father and mother were religious Baptists, peculiar Baptists with a capital P. They believed that 999,000 out of every million people were damned, and they remained cheerful in spite of it. It was my grandparents' Baptist influence on me, I think, that enabled me to get out of what you might almost call what had become in the Quaker sense, not exactly coldness, but a cool calm, which didn't seem to me to cover what was needed in religion. If you're used to your religion, you've lost it. It's got to be new all the time. It's got to be new daily, because otherwise you've lost it. To be in the habit of religion won't do. You have got to be in the experience of religion, which has got to renew itself all the time. I think all this I learned from my grandfather's attitude, get education for its own sake, which in its turn has become for me, now I've joined the church, as a reflex of that seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and all these things shall be added unto you. But don't think of the things that are going to be added unto you, because that would be hopeless. That would make you a Pharisee. You have to do them for its own sake. You have to be good for its own sake, not for any reward that goodness will bring you. Because goodness will not necessarily bring you the reward that you think you ought to have. The reward that you ought to have for goodness is not within your power. It is within God's power. And God will reward his own. But he will reward his own in his way, not in the way that you want him to reward you. I came here in 1928, in early October. It was the first time I've been away from home to live, and until I made some friends, it felt very strange and uncomfortable. However, I went down to Woolworths and bought me a tin kettle and some sheets, and pillowcase, blanket. I was allowed to have a room in college because I was a scholar. I came up, I think, already with a sense that one's conscience wanted the true, the beautiful, and the good to be the same thing. I found confirmation of that to a very large extent in Cambridge.
The whole point, really, about what was happening in Cambridge then was precisely that people were talking about a kind of knowledge in which you couldn't really distinguish between factual knowledge, a moral sense, and aesthetic judgments. I think, looking back on it, that one reason why, in the last analysis, the enterprise of the late 20s and 30s in Cambridge in literature failed was precisely because it had this free-floating approach to a situation which does require some sort of anchor, and the anchor was not there. What they were tending to produce was just a pattern of their own particular predilections.
Yes, but at the same time, you can understand what I mean by rhetorical truth.
Oh, indeed I can, because I think that is, in the last analysis, the only convincing kind of truth, because one's perceptions do have, in the strong, not the weak sense of the word, a coherence which one can only call a style.
And that exists.
Yes, that exists. And in a sense, if we've been trying to find our own, but we're too young, you see, that's the thing you can only find when you get older. You couldn't expect undergraduate students to be trying to find that for themselves.
Well, they wouldn't necessarily get it by trying to find it.
No.
They would get it by pursuing something which resulted in its being there.
Yes, but I mean, really, isn't it true? It's certainly true in my case. What happens when you're a student, you admire certain teachers very much, and you ingest a great deal of their actual personality and attitudes. I've found in my own teaching, sometimes repeating the very gestures of people who taught me, which are not my gestures at all.
Yes, that is interesting, because you see, in our church we can speak of having a direct testimony oneself, but also of having testimony of other people's testimonies, which I think is our kind of way of saying what you've just said.
Yes. I think testimony of other people's testimonies is almost a perfect description, really, of what one is learning when one studies literature. Yes, I think that is a very interesting idea.
Let us be concrete, Arthur, and let us remember what we had together in the old days when we were here, bathing, swimming. You were a good swimmer in those days. We had a lot of walks together. It wasn't so easy, by the by, for a Swedish student in those days to harbor, if one can say so, an Englishman who could be thought to be a spy. And, well, you have memories too from the soldiers passing by here.
Do I not have memories? This was back in 1940.
That was in 40.
And one of the things they loved to do was to walk past this house singing the following. Den wir fahren, den wir fahren, den wir fahren gegen England, England. You remember that?
I do. And I think you made them sing that more often than they actually did. Probably it was a good march tune.
It wasn't that. I think they were having fun.
They were having fun, but not at you.
No.
No.
I came from Cambridge here in 1931. I came from a Cambridge which required students to read in order to have a reaction to what they were reading. The text, however, was not the prime consideration. Coming here to Lund was like coming to a temple of knowledge. During that time, several things happened to me. A son was born to me and my wife in 1935, who died on Easter morning only 7 days after his birth. It was a difficult birth. It seemed unlikely that my wife would want to have any more children. And I think from this state came my drive towards research as a kind of recompense. I found as my mentor a great philologist, Professor Ekvall, who said that he'd had certain ideas when he was a young man about tracing affectation in words in Shakespeare. I picked it up and established a basis for tackling Shakespeare.
What Arthur did was to make us look at the text very closely. And not only that, after teaching us to read, to pay attention to what was actually said in the text and not listening to what the teacher told us to see in it, as they did at school. He also enriched and enlivened the word, as you well know. And this, I think, was the most important experience for all of us.
The differences and the oppositions that we've been talking about are stylistic differences and oppositions. And it is this fact that the stil Salom, the style is the man. The man reveals himself in his language, and language is revealed through the man.
What I'm particularly interested in are the words refine sensibility, refine our sensibility, because that, I think, is just what I'm trying to do in my book as well. As a matter of fact, it seems to me, and has always seemed to me, perhaps with increasing experience and growing old, that it's more important to ask questions sometimes than to answer them.
Well, that's, to me, exactly what tradition is about. It is about being able to state what you can while you can, pass it on to others. The way that I was putting it, time and again more recently, is that as long as there is a possible further reaction, somebody reacting, somebody reading it, somebody watching it, a work of art is never complete. Because obviously further views about that work of art, further reactions to that work of art can still occur.
When I came to Lund, and many people of my generation, we were rather sort of loaded and perhaps are bound by the concept of romanticism. I suddenly found myself rather fed up with it. And I now realize, for a very simple reason, because there is, of course, in this literature, a very strong element of sentimentality. I wanted to get away from that, get something more substantial. And so I was attracted to Milton, whom, of course, has influenced me a great deal earlier. It's just that I wasn't properly equipped to deal with him. But when I found that I was properly equipped, then I began working on him and found myself at home.
Well, now it's a question of why one feels at home. And that's, I think, the profoundest question of all. I was talking about it this morning in the landscape at Torab. Being familiar with something, not setting yourself up as any kind of critic or explainer of humanity, is a condition of being straightforward in speech. because then the speech is not manipulative. Now, the same thing is perfectly true of landscape and everything else. It has obviously to do with the true, the beautiful, and the good. If a thing is truly functional, it's the best kind of shape for its job, then it is a beautiful thing. And the man who handles it may handle it for years without thinking about it, but he loves it and gets used to it. It's his. It's part of him. So this landscape, for example, that are the beaches in the background, these are all parts and parcels of a thoroughly familiar landscape. It is itself, and therefore resembles other things that are themselves. It is become, take the highest level, it is in being identified with the will of his Father that Christ is most himself. It is in being identified with the will of Christ and his Father that we become truly our individual selves. It seems a paradox, but it's what he means about losing his life and saving it. Each individual and particular thing is itself most in reflecting anything and everything else, but it is itself in so reflecting. And I suppose that's what is meant by saying that the whole reflects the parts and the parts reflect the whole.
Looking at the waves from a distance gives you impression that the waves don't move, they stand still. And the interesting fact is that they both move and are at the same place. So that tells you something of the conditions of existence, of reality, I think. And let us hope that it is possible to repeat experiences, and isn't it true too that repetition in life means just as much as unique experiences? And let us hope that life will give us one or two other opportunities to meet before the last wave has reached the shore. Thank you for today, Arthur, and
Thank
for
you.
all days.
Thank you for all days. When you take your doctoral degree, you took it as I took it, in this cathedral at the altar, as part of what is fundamentally a religious service. You have then to swear that you will be faithful, not to the truth, that's to ask too much, but to the truth in your subject. The drama was born out of the church in the Middle Ages, and it is extremely important because unless you realize the origin of the drama in religion, you do not realize what it can do and its importance, ultimately, in being members one of another, and the effect of music in doing that. One side of the choir says, in terms of the visit to the tomb, "Whom seek ye?" And the other side says, "Jesus Christ of Nazareth." And then the other part of the choir replies, "He is not here, he is gone forth into Galilee," and so on. Now that nuclear dialogue between two parts of the choir develops into the tremendous cosmic drama covering everything from creation to the last days, which was developed in the medieval church. An artistic effort, I suppose, on a grander scale when you consider comparative things than anything else that's ever been done in the arts. You express this religious attitude not in ideological terms, not in the philosophies of men, but by being soaked in the scriptures and therefore having a mindset which judges everything else by means of the scriptures. If you take this verse in the parable of the prodigal son, And when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. It's a simple enough verse. But if you study the sound patterns in that verse, you see that you have when, yet, great way, his father had compassion and ran, and then you have fell on his neck and kissed him. So that you have closed vowels, opening up into open vowels, closing again, and then opening up, and finally finishing up with the consonant M, which is a labial consonant. And therefore, the kiss is in the word. It happens to be just merely the pronoun ending in M, but the kiss is in the word. And therefore, if you read that aloud, it makes an appeal not simply to the intelligence, it makes an appeal to the soul, it makes an appeal to the total feelings, that spirit enters body, fuses with body, and becomes soul. The story is there not in order that we might to have an example of repentance, an example of forgiveness, or an example of envy, but in order that we might feel repentance, in order that we might feel forgiveness, and in order that we might abhor envy. In fact, the story is there for us to have a total response to it. If we don't feel this story, it doesn't have any effect on us at all. What I'm trying to drive at here then is this. In music itself, you have the supreme example of things being reconciled that are apparently irreconcilable in a total work. And in this work, in this story, you have the father and the elder son and the younger son. We see them together, and there is a totality about this. And it is a reminder to us that there has to be a totality in experience. And however diverse our experiences may be, they have to come together in one, because there can be only one way of judging things. There cannot be two. If there are two, one must be subordinated to the other, or we are split. And most of mankind nowadays seems to be content to be split. Only in music and the musical effect of language can you get the sense of our being members one of another, of the group being supreme, of our being able to be ourselves only in terms of others, of our being able to know ourselves only in terms of what other people think of us rather than what we may think of ourselves.
In 1945, I left Sweden and joined the British Council.
I had worked for 8 solid years on the routine of research, and I was tired of it. I felt that it had become jejune in me, and the British Council offered me the opportunity of a worldwide career. During that time, I played many different parts in Sweden, in Belgium, in Pakistan, in Iran. This was the kind of work which I most enjoyed, working with people, and mostly working with young people, as old people were usually hopeless anyway. Once I got into the British Council and was appreciated by them and quickly promoted, I think a power element entered also. And that power element was one of the reasons I decided that I would leave the British Council and go back to teaching entirely, because I was becoming too fond of power. Power over people, power over ideas, power to get things done. I discovered that what I was in the end was their slave. They were using us to maintain their own position. We were trying to use them in order to do good, I suppose. We were extremely naive. No, I was not at all happy with my life then, but I had a superficies of jolliness, as you can see. Look at this creature, halfway between a pig and a man. It seems to me that I represent everything that John le Carré would disapprove of, except, of course, that I do have a watch chain, and that is a rather touching point. In 1947, Phyllis Mann discovered that this Shakespeare Institute was available. This house and this bijou erection here were owned by Marie Corelli, who bought this place and lived here with her great friend for many years, writing trashy novels for the enjoyment of the British and American public. This experience of mine at this Shakespeare Institute of the link between Shakespeare and the rest of the world is perhaps the climax of my worldly life. But at the same time, it was not here that I learnt to bring my feelings and impressions about Shakespeare together and integrate them. That was after I'd become converted to the Church of Latter-day Saints and was teaching at Brigham Young University. It's only now that I'm able to see Shakespeare as a late medieval writer, as a Christian writer, and as one who has a powerful Christian message for the world, a message concerned above all with the family, for most of his plays have to do with the family, and with those essential elements in the family, forgiveness and atonement. On the other bank of the river is Shakespeare's parish church. He was christened here, he was buried here at the age of 52. His bust is in that churchyard. I've always thought of him as a man who talked little and therefore observed much. Perhaps my opposite in that respect, for I observe little and talk much. There are things about Christianity that are common to us all. I say this because Shakespeare, as a devout Anglican, and he undoubtedly was, had a broad enough view to know what fundamental Christian beliefs were, uses them in all his plays without exception, and has his actors live and die in the Christian faith, even if they are pagans. I think here, for example, of a scene that I've seen many times in that theatre itself, and that is the scene of reconciliation between Lear and Cordelia, which is an entirely, deeply Christian scene.
How fares your Majesty? You do me wrong to take me out of the grave. Thou art a soul in bliss, but I am bound upon a wheel of fire that mine own tears do scald like molten lead. Sir, do you know me? You are a spirit, I know. When did you die? Still far wide. He's scarce awake. Let him alone a while. Where have I been? Where am I? Fair daylight? I'm mightily abused. I should e'en die with pity to see another thus. I know not what to say. I will not swear these are my hands. Let's see.
I feel this pinprick. Would I were assured of my condition.
Oh, look upon me, sir, and hold your hand in benediction o'er me. No, sir, you must not kneel.
Pray do not mock me. I am a very foolish, fond old man, 80 and upward, not an hour more nor less. And to deal plainly, I fear I am not in my perfect mind. Methinks I should know you and know this man. Yet I am doubtful, for I am mainly ignorant what place this is. And all the skill I have remembers not these garments, nor I know not where I did lodge last night. Do not laugh at me, for as I am a man, I think this lady to be my child. Cordelia?
And so I am. I am.
Be your tears wet? Yes, Faith. I pray, weep not. If you have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me, for your sisters have, as I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause. They have not.
No cause. No cause.
The supreme moment is Cordelia's repetition of "So I am, and no cause, no cause." The repetition is extremely simple. It is one of the most simple rhetorical effects there are, and it springs from very deep feeling. The passage would not be at all the same if I am was not repeated, and no cause was not repeated. And the genius of Shakespeare here is that he does it twice, and not just once here. And each of them is a fundamental statement. The one, "And so I am, she is his child, Cordelia, in the full sense. She has become his child, Cordelia, in the full sense for the first time. She was his child, Cordelia, in one sense before. She unbecame it because she was not in the full sense his child, either on her side or his. Now she is his child in the full sense. And this is, from that point of view, you may say, some kind of distant image of the atonement. At least the existence of the atonement is in the far background of this scene. A superficial wholeness that does not go to the depth of the horror that is in contemporary human life at any age cannot reach supreme art. You cannot have a successful reconciliation between Lear and Cordelia without all that goes before and all that comes after. You cannot have a concept of the value that Desdemona reaches in her last speech on her deathbed, "Nobody, I myself, commend me to my good Lord," unless you have the whole horror of Othello first and after. You can't have a satisfactory king embracing harmony on the throne of Scotland at the end of Macbeth without the horror of Macbeth beforehand. You can't have resurrection on Sunday without crucifixion on Friday. That's why I so deprecate the determination of people to celebrate the good things without celebrating the bad things that make the good things better. The total picture of man, for example, in both the Bible and the Book of Mormon, is of individuals capable of the most extreme of sin and ugliness and filth, but capable also, with the help of the Lord, of doing great things, of nobility, of achievement. Now, the only thing that can unite all those things is the music of the work of art, which enables you to gain an ultimate sense of harmony. And that ultimate sense of harmony is there above all other literary works in the scriptures.
This is the church and the churchyard at Rudgwick, a parish which I frequented for some 14 years altogether. My late wife was christened here and buried here. I attended this church regularly after the death of my late wife. I experienced her death for a whole period of 4 years, that I learned about the deep link, finally about this deep link between grief and joy, and the fact that one is the obverse of the other, and one cannot exist without the other, any more than a mountain can exist without valleys. From the point of the death of Iris onwards, having written very little verse up to that time, I began to write a great deal of verse, a very great deal of verse, almost as much then as I now am doing. And from that point, 1963 onwards, the verse was first of all a means of justifying that death to myself, of making it fit in. And my verse therefore became increasingly religious.
As long as the grass made to grow over you, I had to weed it back. Life was still there. Where is it now, the grave November, bare strips for but vapor to creep and cover you? Glimmer on slug-moist soil, fog drips from trees, unseen with light more candid through the mist, blurring a halo round the next lamppost, enough to outline 5 interdictory leaves. When the spring clears, you will fly further and further still, from where to where, out beyond in the free air. I shall have to struggle with the weeds again, cut back thickening grass over-quickened by rain. But for the time, fog brings us close, and night here on the bare ground, full dark, will bring us closer. Put out the light, remit Promethean heat. Quiet, not a drip, not a sound.
I would say that a poet needs to know that his verse is a means of his own constant conversion, if I could put it that way, of his own constant repentance, from day to day, from hour to hour, to minute to minute. That his verse is therefore not a piece of self-indulgence, but a piece of the profoundest discipline. But remember, the profoundest discipline is the discipline that arises from spontaneous process, which in its turn has been created by a great deal of hard work in discipline. This is a paradox that I can't resolve. It is the paradox by which the Church still asserts that the law is there under the gospel. Of course it is. You can't just write the law off. It is part and parcel of the gospel. But the law is not there any longer except in terms of the gospel. And the gospel wouldn't be able to function without the law. It's like the ballet dancer learning complete spontaneity by hard work over years, or the musician learning how to play his instrument with freedom by intensive practice over years, and so on. It's a paradox, but it's a very important paradox. Hard work produces a situation in which you may receive joy. The hard work is ultimately the hard work of being righteous. There's only one thing I think one can really try to do in one's life, and that's to be righteous from moment to moment. And that is an all-absorbing preoccupation, which ultimately becomes a spontaneity of righteousness. In March 1966, I was digging in my garden, having taken leave from my organization So To Do, which I normally did. I called it digging leave, when I was struck with an idea. I wanted to go and see my Uncle Archie, my father's youngest brother. He was the only surviving member of the family of that generation. I rang him up and said, I'm coming over to have tea, and he seemed pleased, so I went over. And at tea he told me that he was expecting to meet a sort of Canadian cousin.
So I had this strange feeling about the Quakers. I didn't know anything about them, really. My grandfather had left the society when he was a young man, and he'd become an Anglican clergyman. And Quakers were always there, but I didn't know anything about them. And it always seemed if I turned around quick enough, I could catch an ancestress that was haunting me. And I never did see her. I never knew how she dressed even. I just was aware that she was always behind me.
The following Saturday, my cousin Leonard arrived with a person whom I knew must be his wife, although I hadn't met them for 46 years, and another person who I immediately recognized was not his wife. Though why, I don't know.
By the time the next year's flight came along, I had enough money to go, and I went to stay with Leonard, who took me on a trip around town to see, around the country, to see places where our ancestors had lived, including a particular farm, which I didn't know about until I went to England. Arthur always gives me credit for this. It was actually Leonard who told me that there was a Quaker acre as part of this farm, Plaistow Farm, and a lot of our ancestors had been buried there.
It was April, just beginning April, and violets, daffodils, primroses, pheasants nesting, and these mounds. The stones had been removed, but the green mounds remained. And all around were these bluebells and daffodils, and a hen pheasant sitting on her nest, and an atmosphere of very great peace and fertility. So there were those bluebells in my past as I stood there. As a result of this visit to Plaistow, I learnt from her about all the farms round about which our ancestors had owned and tilled over hundreds of years. We believe in the hearts of the fathers being turned to the children, and the hearts of the children being turned to the fathers. And what I've just said about genealogical work and about love is, it seems to me, an exemplification of that. It isn't some kind of formal happening. It's a fundamental happening. The more genealogy we do, the more linked up with the past we are, and the more prospective for the future we are. Because we have a sense of ongoing. We have a sense of there never being an end to it all. And this I would link up with what I've been saying earlier about landscape and about my poetry and about anything else that we've talked about in this film. That we are not looking forward to an end. We are looking forward to an eternal progression. My wife and I have developed a relationship of love and knowledge with a large number of our Quaker ancestors. We know so much detail about their daily lives and about their relationships with other people, the people whom they were with, the people whom they lived with. The fascinating situation of knowing that in one generation here were these people side by side in the same meeting. They never knew that their children or their grandchildren were going to get married to one another. It's this wonderful way of telescoping time, of ignoring time by being able to see all the generations at once, which is an image of eternity. To go into genealogy in this way is, in fact, to construct an image of eternity for oneself, a foretaste of what eternity is like. This power of being with the whole of your family at once, without this sense of family distributing itself over the generations, over hundreds of years. We do not have that sense of satisfaction in ourselves, which will enable us to lead normal lives. It isn't enough to be a member of a current community. You have to be a member of an eternal community. And the family is, for each of us, that eternal community which goes back right to the beginning.
When we went to BYU, and it was amazing how many students seemed to flock around him as a surrogate parent. And the longer he stayed, the more this happened.
Our education nowadays is disintegrative. It is a means of pursuing, at the highest level, things of less and less scope in more and more detail. As soon as you specialize to that point, you are no longer seeing the woods. You're not even seeing the trees. The classics were there because they enabled one, by means of works of art, to get at the totality of a former world in all its aspects. And that word totality is the important word. It is the sense that one's life is totally meaningful, which is ultimately the religious sense. That is why all education needs to be based upon religion. As soon as it ceases to be based upon religion, it disintegrates, and the human being disintegrates with it. You don't learn in education ultimately from books. You don't learn from encyclopedias. You learn from persons. And what you ultimately learn is those persons. Because to say, you see, that painting is a work of art and music is a work of art and literature is a work of art, and not to say that human conversation is a work of art, that human relations are a work of art, is to ignore the fact that the so-called arts are only a special and intensified case of what goes on throughout our lives. There is not much time to develop the relationship between Prospero and Miranda. I don't know whether you've noticed it, but after Act 1, Scene 2, Prospero never addresses Miranda.
As a matter of fact, at halftime, when I would go get an apple, I would start the headache about then, just trying to hold in my head everything he was telling us about the details of the poem.
Marriage in politics as being the family behind politics. But you could see politics in marriage as the power ploy in marriage itself. There were young people who sought me out, and I didn't choose them, they chose me. There are now 44 of them, and of course honorary grandchildren too. So I have a veritable patriarchal family, and that is what I've made out of my sonless life, and the church, and my patriarchal blessing. Consequently, I rejoice having to construct something upon which to rejoice. But like all good constructions, it was done for me. I didn't have to do it, it happened. The conversion can be the work of a lifetime, or can be the work of many years. There comes the point at which the things come together as they came together in my life. The Quaker belief in the spirit, the Islamic belief that religion is for all the details of life, that remark of Bertrand Russell's about the fact that surely you can't expect to be eternal if you weren't eternal all the time, if I may make an Irishman's remark. It would be sound for you to think of every process that you see or think of as illusory, except that which is represented by the gospel. And that is why the gospel is the way in which you judge everything else. You cannot be in reality except by faith. You cannot be there by reason. Not cosmos, but earth. Not hive, but family. Not nature, but landscape. Not self, but individual. Not body or spirit, but soul. Not idea, but image. Not concept, but word. Not looking inward, but making for others, all in the shadow of the wing.